Hi, friends. Today we are graced by Audrey Ross and her 3 incredible birth stories. I absolutely loved hearing her tell these stories because even though her first 2 births were technically in the system, Audrey embodied her power and trust in birth throughout these experiences, and it is so incredible to hear her tell. Her first born Breech in a hospital, then choosing a midwife-assisted home birth for her second, and with her third pregnancy realizing that she can do this all on her own without a provider. Audrey is a birthkeeper and queen of birth memes. Go give her a follow at A Joyful Birth. She is hilarious. She is full of wisdom and has so much trust in birth. There are so many gold nuggets to pick up from this conversation, and I hope you all enjoy.
Love to. So I live in Oregon with my husband, and we have 3 biological children, and we have 2 children who are permanently with us through foster care. And I'm also expecting. So this will be 6, or if there's twins in there, because it's a wild pregnancy, there'll be 7, or I have a son who's praying for triplets. So I don't know. We'll see how
Oh my
far.
goodness. Amazing.
Yeah, he is. The whole pregnancy, he's been like, "Mom, like I'm praying for triplets," and I'm like, "Dude,
That is
maybe
so
don't."
sweet.
So,
So sweet.
um, my oldest is almost 10, so I will have been in my motherhood journey for about that long. And I'm also a birth keeper, and I do a lot of birth coaching, and I'm very passionate about birth and all things womanhood, but really birth is where I feel like God has called me predominantly, and that's been through a journey of my own births as well. And my husband is actually a pastor. We were just talking about that. You're like, oh, I did not know that. So he's a pastor, and we've been in ministry for 18 years. Um, so yeah, that's been my life until I was a stay-at-home mom, and then I worked in as a personal trainer, and then I worked managed a really large running store, and kind of more in the health side of things until I stepped into birth work, and then I let all of my personal training and my nutrition coaching and everything go. But running was it still is a big part of my life, but that kind of led my personal training and working in the running industry for quite a few years before having kids. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the thing that got you into birth work? Was it having like a beautiful birth experience yourself that kind of like brought that passion up in you, or yeah, was there a specific?
I feel like it was the whole journey, which like you'll hear as I tell my stories, but really I found out that like the medical system did not serve me well. The midwifery system did not serve me well. And then the more I learned about birth, I just became passionate because I felt like women didn't actually know what we need to know to birth.
Yeah.
And that, like everything in our world, it has been corrupted by lies. It just that's the nature of our world, right? We have an enemy, and then he is full of lies, and so
Mhm.
every system in our world is saturated with those lies, and the birth system is not separate from that. It also is. And so seeing the truth and also experiencing the truth through my own free birth and having it be the most empowering, liberating, amazing thing ever, made me realize like this is what I'm called to do. And I also grew up with the language of birth. My mom was a doula. I had a sister who's a midwife. So like birth was our normal conversation. So this wasn't a foreign topic either. So I
Mm.
mean, this was a very common language just around the dinner table. So discussing birth, like that wasn't a new thing for me, and caring about women, even, in their pregnancies and postpartum, like even before birth work, I was very much a part of just naturally kind of being there for a woman um, as she was pregnant in her postpartum period. Like that's just something I cared about because I grew up in that environment. Um, but yeah, seeing what it's supposed to be and seeing what the world has made it was like that felt like a very big calling of like, no, I this is what I'm called to do. Um, yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. So you said you had your daughter 10 years ago. And so where were you at that time in your life, and what decisions did you end up making for her birth?
So at that point, my husband and I had been married 9 years, and we had never prevented pregnancy. And I actually didn't know if I could get pregnant. God woke me up in a dream and said, it's time to have a baby. And literally, like my next cycle, I was pregnant. So that was totally a God
Wow.
thing. I that was terrifying to me to a point because I actually had hit a point. At that point, I was running really well. I was racing. I was the manager of the largest running store in the nation. And so and they were making money, like I was helping them make money. Like it felt like I had like risen to this heights of my, career. And so I knew that everything would change. But I also knew that I did want children. Although I kind of put that on the back burner, like maybe it'll never happen because I hadn't gotten pregnant. But getting pregnant, yes, everything shifted. As you and I were talking before about having morning sickness and identity crises, um, I had horrible morning sickness because I had to quit. I mean, I had to quit my job. Everything shifted from like being go, 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 running all the time, managing, and a whole store and all the employees and everything to like literally laying on my couch, like watching Netflix and just trying to survive on like gummy bears because I couldn't keep anything down.
Yeah.
And now understanding why that can happen in pregnancy, yeah, through German new medicine is like, yeah, well, of course I was so sick, right? It was like such an
Yeah.
identity crisis. But I was so sick. We initially went to a hospital because we thought like, well, insurance will cover it. And I just kind of thought like, well, like I already know I'm going to say no to everything, but we'll just go. And it was the worst experience. Like it was so awful. This little tiny office they put us in. We saw the doctor like 2 minutes. The girl who was like taking the intake forms looked like she was like 12 to me. And I mean, I was 31 at that point. And I felt like, I mean, she's probably 22, but like I felt like she was so young and didn't know what she was doing. And I just was annoyed with the whole thing. And so we left and we're like, yeah, we're never going back there again. So we found a birth center and some midwives that we liked. And it was actually, they were great through my pregnancy, but they still did all the normal testing, right? And at that point, I didn't know, like, you don't need to do all this stuff. But we did it all. We did, like a couple ultrasounds and, all the GBS and the glucose and all of that. Actually, I don't think I did glucose, but um, at 36 weeks, they said, we think your baby's breech. And so we did an ultrasound. She was, and they dropped me. They're like, we can't legally, you know, be with you at your birth. And that felt devastating to me. My mom had had breech babies. So mom had had 4 vaginal breech births. I myself was one of them. And my sisters had had breech births. It was like a very common thing in my family. And so I was like, wait, what? Like, I didn't read that paperwork, right? At the beginning, it probably said it somewhere,
Yeah.
but I had no idea. So I spent, the next couple weeks trying to do all the things to turn her, which I would never do now. But I did like 2 external cephalic versions, which where they go in and like manually try to turn your baby. It's
Yeah.
so risky. You shouldn't do it. Easily pull the placenta off the wall. It's very
Yeah.
tons
Super
and tons of
scary.
risk. Tons of risk, and it's also very painful. Um,
Yeah, that's
I
what I
did
was thinking. Like, oof,
very painful. They offered me an epidural for it, and I was like,
what?
"I'm not going to take an epidural for birth. Like, what in the world? Like, oh no." And I think actually why they do that is because they know that they could easily pull the placenta off the wall, which would be an immediate C-section, and they would rather you were already ready. So that's
What
why they
makes
offer
total
it.
sense.
Yeah, but they'll tell you they're offering it because it's so painful, which it is painful, but it's not that painful. Like like I
To
wouldn't
get
have.
a whole epidural.
Yeah, exactly. Like birth itself was still more, intense. Um, but that is why they do it. But they're not going to say that, right? They're not going to be like, "Well, we actually are prepping you for the fact that we could, pull the placenta off the wall of your uterus." Thank goodness she didn't move. I did like moxibustion and like acupuncture and all the things. I'm like laying upside down on tables. Silliness. Anyways, we found out that there was a hospital in Portland. We were not in Portland, Oregon at the time. We were in Idaho, and they were starting to practice breech birth in the hospital. And so they actually approved my birth and said, you can come here and deliver. And so we were planning to go there, but my water broke before we left. So it broke early in the morning, and we went into my midwife. We still had a relationship with them, and they're like, because they're like, well, let's make sure it's really your water. Well, of course it's really your water. It like gushed all over the road. Um, and they're like, honey, you're already dilated to a 6. So at this point, like still having all the cervical checks, all the things. And they're like, you're not going to Portland. It's like, oh, okay, crap. And they're like, but we can't be with you at your birth. I didn't know I could just stay home and have a baby at that point. Didn't even know that was a thing or an option. And so my midwife like looked at me very clearly and she was like, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. They can't make you do anything you want you to they, you know, that you don't want to do. And I have to be grateful to her for that fact that she like at least spoke that over me.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm gonna call ahead and tell them you're coming. And I'm gonna tell them that you're declining a C-section. Cause I told her, that's what I'm gonna do. And I was like, great. So she like calls the hospital. I spend all my, we spent hours. Like I went and bought like all my favorite pastries and like all the food I was going to bring. Cause I was like, screw you. I'm bringing all the food in. And I went home and showered. Like I was like putting off the time to get there because I knew it was going to be a fight. And so we arrived when it was getting really hard to breathe through sensations. And my mom was supposed to be coming too. She was going to be my doula. She was, she's a doula. So she's going to be my doula. And she got there shortly after. She'd been in another birth and she was traveling. Um, and so we got there and like literally we had multiple people come in the room and say, this is why your baby's going to die. This is why you need a C-section over and over again. Like they kept sending like another person in, like, let's try this person. Let's try this person. And the doctor came in, the OB on call came in several times to talk to us. And I said no. And like, I knew all of my stuff. I knew the breech birth was safe. I knew that I had the best case scenario for breech birth, which is Frank Breech. I knew her help, she'd already engaged. Like we knew all the things. And so finally I signed an AMA so that it's going against medical advice. And they left me alone about that. And my labor proceeded. I refused to put on their gown. I refused to be hooked up to anything. I refused to let them put in an IV. Like if you're like, I refused it all. And I left the premises. Like they're like, you can walk the halls. And I'm like, oh, I will be walking outside
Oh,
of
they
the
must
hospital.
have hated you.
They did. Yeah, they did.
I love it though. Like I love this so
Like
much.
they can't force you. They cannot like physically
Yeah.
force you to be there. Um,
But
so we
they'll
just,
always act like you have
yeah,
to.
yeah. We went outside and like walked around outside around the hospital. We like went and like ordered a coffee downstairs, like their Starbucks. Um, we and like hung out down there for a while. Like we were everywhere until I finally was like, okay, like I'm feeling like I'm getting really vocal. I need to get to a place that feels not like I'm out in public. And my mom had arrived, and the midwife actually she arrived just to be there to support. Although, which is funny, like she couldn't be at my birth, but then she's going to come and support. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, right.
And the worst part of that whole labor was cervical checks. It was the worst part. It was just straight torture. And I had been active and moving through labor, and then I would have to lay down, and that felt horrible. I had back labor. It was awful. Oh, I forgot to mention. So the midwife or the doctor on call, once I signed the AMA, her whole tone changed, and she was like, "Actually, I was trained in breech delivery in my early years as an OB, and I like I'm okay with it." But she couldn't say that until I signed the AMA.
All the
Her
politics.
liability. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
She fought me and was like, "You're killing your baby," until I signed that stupid AMA.
And then
But
she's like, oh, we'll be fine.
yeah, yeah, but it's also God that like she was on call that day. Like I feel like there's so many God pieces that she happened to be the one. And so she didn't have this fear response to breech birth because she had at least experienced it before, where most OBs haven't, and they do stupid, stupid things because they haven't experienced it at all. And so, but she still like was like, you're only going 12 hours after your water breaks. Like you need to have your baby in the 12 hours. And I at that point was like, well, yeah, sure. Like I'm gonna move through this labor and make it happen. I don't know what would have happened if I went over 12 hours. I didn't. But so I was active and moving until these dumb cervical checks. And after one of them, it finally just like I couldn't get up. Like once I laid down, it's like I couldn't get back up. and I hit transition and I puked and I screamed, and it was a very, very felt like a very long transition. It often is for first time moms, especially. But in any pregnancy, it could be. But it was, yeah, it was the dramatic ones where you puke after every contraction, and yeah, it was dramatic. But eventually she came in and she checked me and she said, oh, and the whole time I kind of felt like I wanted to push, but she said, you're not going to push until we make sure like your cervix, there's no little lip of your cervix left. So that was like her one thing she said. And so the whole way through labor, everybody's saying like, breathe, don't push, like blow, light blowing, instead of like, like you hold your breath and you want to
Yeah.
push. So like blow, 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 blow. So everybody's saying that to me. My mom, my midwife, there's another nurse in there, my husband. And so this whole time I'm like trying not to push, trying not to push, trying not to push. And the doctor finally comes in. She checks me. She's like, you're fully dilated. I want you to wait another 45 minutes because we want to make sure that everything's totally open. So I did. And that felt like
Sure.
torture. Yeah. But at least nobody was like literally physically holding my baby in, which happens to some women. But then after that, she comes in and she's like, you have to go to the OR to deliver because if we need to cut you open, I want you already in the OR. And I agreed. I was like, fine, like whatever. And so they like wheeled me in there, but I had to like climb off that bed and like climb up on it's not a table for birth. It's literally like a metal slat for operating. And it's freezing cold in there. There were 18 other people in there all ready to cut me open. They're all in blue garb.
Oh
Like
my
literally, my mom
goodness.
counted. She was like, Audrey, there's 18 people. And I was like, yeah, it felt like a crowd. And at that point, like I'd been holding off pushing, like I was ready. She was like, you can push. And my daughter probably came out in like 2 or 3 pushes, honestly, because I mean, I was very ready to push.
Yeah.
But what's funny is as I pushed, it like shot all of her meconium out of her because it like squoze her little butt. So I could like see that. I hope I hit the doctor a little bit. But it was like
I love
flying out of
that.
her. But it felt like because women are like, what does a breech birth feel like? It wasn't harder, it just felt different, but it did feel like that ring of fire, that stretching is far more prolonged, and I felt like I was pushing out a loaf of bread. Like, it felt like this eternal, like,
Okay.
"Whoa," like, coming out of me, um,
Yeah.
and, like, that was my visual, and I remember she was like, "You can reach down and feel your baby," but there was, like, no way to even, like, totally sit up anyways. I think I maybe felt at one point, um, but it's probably only 2 or 3 contractions, and so then her body was out, and then my next contraction, her head was out, boom. And they laid her right up on me, um, but then they immediately cut the cord, pulled out my placenta, and shot me in the leg with Pitocin. All of that without asking, right?
Oh my
Right?
goodness.
Everything else, the thing is like I knew to say no, 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 no to everything else. But the moment after birth, you are not at that point, you are not in a place to be like saying no, right? You're now like in an oxytocin flood and
Yeah.
you just want to love your baby. So they just do all those things. They're just like, oh, we're just down here taking care of you. Like, you're fine. Like, just leave it to us. So the moment the Pitocin hit me, I went blank. Like I don't have a memory from that point till like hours later when we were back in our recovery room with our baby. And that's sad to me. I didn't even realize that till years later when I stepped into birth work and like started hearing women's stories and the effects of Pitocin. And I was like, oh, that's why. Like I just didn't know why. I was like, it's all just blurry. Like maybe I was just tired,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
mean, I was just like, "Oh, maybe it's because you just, like, pushed a baby out that you're so
Yeah,
exhausted that you don't remember anything," but, like, no,
right.
that's not normal.
Yeah. So like nope, that's not normal. That is not normal. That's Pitocin. That's what it'll do to you. And so I just yeah, it's my husband would like tell me like, like we were there and then we went to a recovery room and then like they weighed and measured and and I have like some pictures. I have like pictures of me like with the doctor and my midwife, my mom all together and the baby like it's a prize and like I don't remember, but I have the picture. Um it's really weird.
Yeah.
It's like there was no bonding. I think my mom's like, "Yeah, she latched," like, once you're back in the recovery room. And because my mom was there, like, telling me what to do, so I still did that, like, "Let's get your baby latched," all those kind of things, but it just is I was very numb through that whole thing
Yeah.
until, like, later that it was probably, like, midnight, so I had her at, like, 8 o'clock. Um, it was like midnight or even after, I was just awake. I couldn't sleep. And it's like finally I met her for the first time. Like she was in my arms and I was like, "Oh my goodness, like you're here." So, I did leave the hospital feeling really, really powerful because I had like gone against everybody and in my mind I had still had the vaginal birth I wanted. They didn't cut me open for this breech baby. My story went all around the hospital. I mean, people telling me about it. Yeah, weeks and months afterwards, like, oh, I heard from so and so, blah blah blah. Um, but it wasn't until later that I like saw those other pieces of it that were disheartening, and I grieved them later. I did because I realized what it could have been. Um, but it was still a powerful way to step into motherhood and to know like I'm still going to make my own decisions and I don't have to cave to the obstetric system, basically.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
That's
So
incredible.
that was number 1. Yeah.
And so, how long after your first were you ready to have another? How was your postpartum as well? Like, you know,
Yeah.
after that kind of birth?
It was pretty rough. And I attribute it to that. Um,
Mm,
my little girl, she had, I mean, what we would call colic, which I don't even know if
yeah.
I really even agree with colic anymore, but what seemed to be colic. And it's like I felt very attached to her. I really did, but she honestly, like, she didn't sleep well with me. Like, she was unhappy most of the day. My husband would come home and like swaddle her and hold her, and she would go to sleep with him. And I kind of felt like, oh my goodness, like, why doesn't she sleep with me? She still nursed well. I nursed her for 2 years. That was never a problem. But I also started dealing with anxiety. My mineral levels were really off. I hadn't
Mm,
taken any minerals during that pregnancy, and then I started like running and exercising pretty shortly after. Like I wanted to get back to me, and I ended up like in the hospital like months later for like low potassium and some other, like my minerals were just off. And so, and even then, like I never saw it as being some awful thing. Like I mean, I'm a pretty like gritty person. I never really complained about it, but looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, I've had some like very smooth postpartums. My last one was very smooth. Um, I'm like, oh yeah, that was not smooth. But you don't know what you don't know when
yeah,
you're first.
exactly. If you have
I'm like, oh,
nothing
I
else
guess
to
it's just this
compare it
hard.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like it's just this hard. This is how hard it is to have a baby. But now I'm like, it doesn't actually have to be that hard. Like it can be a little bit easier.
for
So
sure.
um, we about yeah when my daughter was about 2, um, we were like, yeah, I think we're ready again. And then we did get pregnant shortly after she turned 2, um, again. So we at that point had moved. Do you want me to just jump into that one?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we had moved from Idaho. We were in Oregon, and again, I got pregnant. Thought, yeah, we're gonna go with midwives. Surely I can't have another breech birth, right? Not 2 in a row. Oh my goodness. So I found a birth center again, and probably one of the more well-known ones in my area. And the pregnancy was incredibly smooth. It was so smooth. No morning sickness, could eat anything, felt good that entire pregnancy. And I felt like I had really stepped into the role of motherhood at this point. Like I had gotten past kind of the trauma of having a new baby and adapted, and I was feeling very very good in myself and my body and in motherhood. Um, and I didn't have any like major hangups with my like prenatal care except for it just felt pointless. Like we go to these appointments, like I don't really have anything to say to them. I would never ever look at the scale because that's not something that I care to know. That I'd have to do these, my urine, I'd test my urine. And then I just felt like why are we doing this? Like, this is not what I need. I know enough about birth. I mean, I had already researched birth and then I'd done it more over those past 2 years. So like, I was at a point of being like, I think I know all this, like, but whatever. So that just felt kind of pointless to me. Um, and then as it got closer to his due date, for some reason with him, I was like so adamant for him to be born. And part of it, I think, is my mom and my dad came. They were both going to be at the birth. I wanted them to. My son is my dad's namesake, and so I wanted him to be at the birth as well. And I feel really comfortable with him. Um, but they were like, here, they came early because I thought maybe I was going to have baby early because I'd had my daughter early, and I didn't. I went past my due date. So they're just like, here. And I remember being so annoyed that like people were in my house and like I just wanted the baby to come. And so I was doing all the things you can do to, I mean, I never did like castor oil. I never did like any of the herbs, but I was like, like all the silly things, like making eggplant and eating spicy food. And like, there's just so many silly things if you start to like Google, oh,
The
they're just
eggplant,
dumb.
the famous eggplant
It's
farm.
so stupid. It's the stupidest thing. It's so
It's
stupid.
such a head game. It's such
It's
a
such a
head
head
game.
game. Yeah. Yeah, I remember making this meal and being like, "I hate eggplant, like, why am I eating this?" I spent
Literally.
all this time to make it. Oh, so dumb. But I had this one afternoon that nobody was in the house, my daughter was sleeping, and I was mopping the kitchen floor, and I was just, like, swaying to music, and I just remember thinking, like, "This would be a beautiful place to give birth." Like, I love just feeling so free, and that was probably just like a week or 2 before I went into labor. So I had that in my mind. And then it's also interesting, my I wanted my kitchen floor so clean this entire like the entire last trimester. I was obsessed with it. And then my parents came and my dad is like the ultimate for like tracking in dirt. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, dad, like seriously, like take your boots off at the door." Like it was driving me crazy. He was like doing yard work and then he would like trape because I gave him projects. I'm like, "You need to stay busy, dad. Like if you're here, like you're busy." So he was like putting in a patio for us and all this stuff. And he just kept traipsing in dirt. So I was like mopping the floor constantly. I just was it annoyed me. I was like, "Why can't I keep my floor clean? I just want a floor clean. That's all I want. That's all a girl wants." And
Yep.
um finally we like told my parents finally they were like, "The baby's not coming." And they went RV shopping. And they were like gone for days, which was great. So my husband and I, we took off. We were like gone out of town for a day. And I mean, part of that is like my body just needed to be like away from everybody. And so it was early morning and I had prayed in all of my pregnancies, I pray to have a baby during the day. Like I really am not a night person and I want to have my babies during the day. And so every baby I have, I've had them during the day. And so we woke up and I remember feeling like some back pressure. We went for a walk, but it wasn't anything more than back pressure. I just was like, "Oh, like that's interesting." And at one point I said to my husband, like, "I like this might turn into something. Like, I don't know if it is something, but it might turn into something." And we came home and my parents were back. They had just gotten back. They just bought an RV. They just came back with it. My mom was like, "We want to show you around." And I was like, "No, I want to get showered first and like get some lunch and then maybe we can go drive around in it." And so like we went in, we showered. I think we had sex because at that point I was like, we're having all the sex because I'm trying to make
We're
this baby.
doing all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like all the things all the time. I was like, "All right, babe, like come on, like we're making it happen." um, but I was in the shower and I remember thinking to myself, like, I wonder if I'm dilated. Like, I'm just going to see if I'm dilated. And so I like reached up to like find my cervix and there was no cervix and I could feel the bag of waters. And I was like, "Oh, like that's
Wow.
interesting." Yeah. I was kind of like in shock. And then like moments after this really hard contraction hit, like it was so strong. And I was like, "I think I need to get out of the shower. Like, I feel like something's happening." So like the next like one more contraction hit and I like called my mom and I was like, "Mom, like these I'm getting some contraction. They're pretty hard." And she was like, "Well, let's just time them." So she like timed 2 and she was like, "I would call your midwives because they were like almost an hour away." And I was like, "Okay." So we like called them and they're like, "Yeah, just keep us posted." And literally like then like 2 more contractions and we were texting them saying, "Come now." Because they hit so hard. Like it was like I was like immediately in transition. It was like we skipped all early labor. And early labor must have been while I was walking, like low back pressure. That's all I experienced. And so I had saved this, I had like bought these cinnamon rolls to eat in labor, and I was like trying to thaw them out and so I could eat them because I was like, I want to eat my labor food. Like I have these beautiful cinnamon rolls to eat. And so like there's pictures of me in labor and the cinnamon roll has like 2 bites out of it because I got like 2 bites in. Um, but everything was so fast, so quickly that I felt really disoriented by it.
Mm.
I remember my parents were like in the kitchen with me. My husband was there. My daughter went to a friend's house. And 'cause at that point I was like, I don't know if I want her here. I kind of regret that. I do regret that because she's like, "Why wasn't I there, mommy?" And I'm like, "I don't know, honey. Like, I didn't know kids could handle it. And she's like, I would have wanted to be there. And I'm like, I know, I'm sorry. My
Oh,
heart. So yeah, kids care and kids can totally be there. But
yeah.
at that point, that that was the decision made. I remember yelling at my parents, like, get out of there, get out of the kitchen. And they like, ah, I quickly got out of the kitchen. But I just needed my space to feel like I could like move. And I just
Yeah.
was trapped at the kitchen counter, which this is where I've been with my labor, which is really crazy. And my floor was totally clean. And so I probably, I don't know, half an hour in, I put headphones on because I felt so engulfed in whatever I was feeling that I felt manic almost. Like I couldn't even handle it. There was no
Yeah.
break between sensations. It was just like contractions were just like like landing on top of each other with no breather in between. And so I ended up having like one or two songs that were just on repeat because I could at least predict that those were going to be consistent because it felt like everything else was just like crashing around me.
Mm.
Um and at one point, probably like 2 hours in, I contract like threw me to the ground. And so then I was like down on hands and knees. And I remember my mom being like, "Do you want you like let's get you pillows and cushions like under your knees?" And I was like, "No!" Like I just wanted to feel like the cold, hard floor. Like it felt really good. I was like sweating, and I just was like, "No, I just want like this." And then 15 minutes before my son was born, my midwives arrived, and I hated like everything felt really fine, right? Like all of I was overwhelming, but like I felt safe. It all felt okay. Like I could yell at my parents and tell them to go away. Like we have that relationship. Like everything was okay. And then they came in, and my eyes were closed the whole time, but I could like feel the Doppler on my stomach, and I like, knew they were
Yeah.
there. And I just looking back, like after as I looked at the birth later, I was like, I hated that. Like the moment they came in, I hated it. And like they're like putting down their bag all around me, like it's like a medical scenario. And I just like, oh. And then so my midwife at one point, she was like, you should probably take your shorts off. And I was so mad at her. I was like, I can't move. Like, how am I gonna take my shorts off? Like, I was like, oh, you should have told me this. Somebody should have told me this sooner. I remember thinking that. Like, why didn't somebody tell me?
Get
So
scissors
anyway,
and cut them off.
yeah, exactly. So like managed to get my shorts off. And but I was also feeling crazy because my first birth, everybody had said, like, don't push, don't push, don't push, don't push. And now I'm like, I have no idea where I'm at in this process. I don't know if I'm supposed to push. I don't know if that's just gonna hit me. Like I have no idea. And I just felt like what if this goes on for hours? Nobody had told me anything. At this point, I didn't understand that there was even something called precipitous labor. I just thought like, what's happening? Because I don't know if I can keep doing this for 12 hours, like my first birth. I was like this is crushing me. And I mean, yeah, it was very, very intense. Far more intense than my first. My first was, well, yeah, it was painful, but like this felt far more intense. And at one point, my mom just like leaned over and I could hear her through my headphones. And she was like, your baby's going to be here soon, which was the most beautiful thing for her to say because that's what I was like. I just felt so lost, but she could tell by my voice. So she told me later, she's like, I mean, she's at least learned enough in what the work she does that she knows when a woman's going to give birth. You can tell by the sound of a woman's voice, by her body language, by everything that's happening. Like we don't need to do cervical checks, right? You can observe a woman and know if her baby's coming.
Yeah.
And so she was just observing me, she was hearing me, and she was like, "Yeah, your baby's coming soon." And that's what I mean, that's so desperately what I needed. Like I was looking for something to like grasp onto, like what's happening to me. And at that point I was like, I think I'm gonna push. Like I feel like I should. And I remember like the moment I pushed, he was already there, right? I already felt the bag of waters. Like he
Yeah.
was already there. Um, and so the first push, my water broke, and there was like a little burst of water and a burst of blood, and then it was a few more contractions, and it like I was obviously like I had to push, like he was coming out, and so I pushed pretty hard because I just was like I'm done with this, get the baby out. But my husband was behind me, so his hands and knees, they still caught the baby, even though he was right there. That was disconcerting to me as I look back on it. Like, why didn't they just say like, go ahead and get your baby, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but then as I like sat up, so they like passed baby through my legs and I like leaned back on my husband and he was immediately fine, vibrant, you know, crying. His hair was like white. It was crazy. He was born with like literally like white hair. Like he was almost like it was like translucent. It was crazy.
That was
But they
my
were like
son.
all just there. Like they didn't back up. They just like stayed
Mm.
right there. And I hated that feeling. So I hadn't actually acknowledged them yet. So I remember I felt this need to be like, "Hi, you're here in my home." Because I hadn't really seen them yet. I'd really had I mean, it's been 15 minutes, had my eyes closed, like everything just happened. And I hate that I even like had that to pull me away or felt that need to like look up and like greet them instead of just being totally immersed in
Yeah.
the way. Um, but that's what I see it in videos. I watch women like after they have their baby, instead of like looking at their baby or their husband, just watch it. Like as you observe videos, they will like look up to their midwife because it's totally like this like good girl people pleaser
Yeah.
thing that we do to be like, "Thank you for being here," to the stranger in the room. And ins if women are free birthing, they don't do that. You can watch the difference in the births,
Yeah.
or if you have a
So
midwife
true.
who leads and it, like, knows how to get out of there the moment the baby emerges, that doesn't happen. They literally, like, get so focused on their baby. And they might look at their husband and, like, with, eyes of love and kiss them and just be like, "We did it." But they don't look at the midwife. Like, "Don't look at your midwife." Like, they like so, but
Yeah.
that's what I did. And, so that part felt disconnected. And they were, because they've been there only 15 minutes, the baby's born, it's like they realized like, "Ooh, this is short. We can get out of here quick." And they really rushed everything. They never pulled the placenta out, but they still were like coaxing me like, "It's time. Like, let's do this. Let's cut the cord. Let's," like they were trying to move, "Let's do the newborn exam." They were trying to like move me through all the things instead of
Mm.
having just that time to just be with my baby with zero pressure. So I did feel pressured through all of that. And that was, yeah, another thing that I didn't like. I shook for hours afterwards. So you do have adrenaline that kicks in when your baby comes out. And usually that adrenaline, like your body has time for it to wear off throughout labor, like through that, those last pushes. But everything happened so quickly, my body was just still flooded with adrenaline. And so my legs just shook and shook and shook afterwards, which was really strange because you shake often in transition or other times in labor, but I just kept on shaking. And that can happen in a precipitous birth. That's not
Yeah.
uncommon. Um,
So how
but
many hours from the shower
yes, it
where
was
you did the cervical check yourself to baby being
two
born?
and a half hours.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it
That's
just felt
wild.
like a train, like, just hit me. Yeah, 2 and a half exactly from, like, the very first contraction to he's out, and it was
And your
nonstop,
first was
12
was
hours. 12 hours for my water breaking, which I had had some, again, like, some feelings in my back before that, but really once my water broke is when the contraction started, and so it was 12 hours almost exactly,
wow. That
which
is
is
so
still pretty
intense.
fast for a first birth. 12 hours is
Yeah, no,
very,
12 hours is great, but
yeah.
2.5. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. It was it felt harder, honestly, it felt harder than my first birth, and,
Yeah.
for weeks afterwards, I would listen to the song I'd listened to, I'd hold my baby in the dark in our bedroom, and I would just cry, and I honestly, like, now I understand the reasons for it, and actually it's a really good thing to do because in a longer labor, you are processing, processing, processing as it's happening, and I didn't have a chance to process anything. Nothing was processed. Like I literally was just trying to like hold on for dear life is what it felt like. And so all the processing had to happen afterwards. So I would like every day I would be like tell my husband like don't bother me, like I'm going to go cry while I listen to my birth song and hold my baby. And it just like my brain, like I had to like keep replaying it and like break parts of it down and think about different points and things I felt, and it was really healing to do that. So I'd honestly tell anybody, like, if you've had a precipitous birth, there's probably healing to be done afterwards. That's not a bad thing, but like recognizing that that's there for you to do. Um, and some women just their precipitous birth is just like a couple contractions, and the baby comes out. But for me, they were just stacked. Like I don't even know. Like it was like one massive contraction. Uh, that was, yeah, it
And
was
that is
crazy.
so intense. Yeah, that wow.
Yeah.
Um would you say that after that birth you felt like slightly traumatized from how it all went down?
Yes, I did. In fact, and it's weird because nobody would acknowledge that. Like, "Oh, you lucky thing, 2.5 hours." And I was like,
Oh yeah,
"No, no, that rocked my world." Like, that rocked my world. Yeah, it was
for
very much
sure.
like, "Oh, easy breezy because it's short," and that's not the case. For many women, they can feel far more shook by a fast labor than by one that actually, like, has some ebbs and flows to it, where they
Oh yeah, for
yeah,
sure. That's
yeah,
totally what I hear from women.
yeah, yeah. It was but nobody I mean, everybody just tells you, yeah, "You're so lucky,
Oh,
oh my"
you're lucky. Yeah.
yeah. In fact, so then is my with my 3rd, I had some, like, anxiety come up of like, "Oh my goodness, what if this happens faster? Like, what if it's 45 minutes? Like, how am I gonna handle that?"
Yeah. So, okay.
That was
So
tough.
after you processed, like allowed all of that to move through your body and
Mhm.
process everything, how was postpartum after this birth?
I had anxiety after this one too. Um, in fact, I started going to some counseling at that point, and part of it was like I had 2 babies, and all of a sudden it was like, "Oh my goodness, there's 1 of me and 2 of you." And that but that just felt I don't know, that felt overwhelming to me, but I also think again, it like that initial bonding. So it's so crucial. So both of those babies, that initial bonding period was broken. And that
Yeah.
is just crucial for your postpartum. And women don't realize that. I'm like that moment, it's
It's
everything.
huge.
And so I can
Hmm.
see how that plays out. And so I remember I would feel anxiety until I would nurse him. So I'd be like, "Oh, we need to nurse, like we need to nurse." And then I would like feel that oxytocin and I would like relax and calm down. Um and and I did some EMDR and stuff, and that stuff was it was all very helpful and I moved through it. But it was still like I had a lot of postpartum anxiety. And there were months that I, like, didn't wanna drive anywhere by myself, terrified to leave the house by myself. It was probably almost worse with my 2nd because now there were 2 babies, and I didn't understand the postpartum period either, so I rushed back into life too soon. All those things can be detrimental. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that was a big thing for my next being like, "I'm not doing those things. That's not happening." Um, and
Yeah.
it made me
Unfortunately, it's sometimes goes that way where we have to kind of walk um that hard road where we like, you don't know what you don't know. So
no,
it's like we're just kind of going through life. And unfortunately, our society doesn't, it support women
it
at
doesn't.
all
Nope.
when it comes to birth, postpartum, motherhood. There's just so many obstacles that we have to navigate through as if, you know,
Yeah,
as if it's not challenging enough, to
exactly.
prepare for this.
You're
Yeah.
like already doing this big hard work and you need to like fight upstream to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be very, very challenging. If you have a community of people around you who acknowledge that, that can be so supportive, but most women don't.
Yeah.
That's a rarity. Like we might see these accounts on social media with women who seem to have that, but that is not common. It's very common to
No,
just everybody
it's not.
nobody gets it. Nobody gets it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to constantly remind myself that as a birth worker, like, of course, we have our community online and Instagram, like, and when you have, you choose who you follow, and so all you're seeing is what you're allowing yourself to be exposed to.
Exactly.
But it's important for me to like constantly remind myself like this is not the norm and you are not the norm. Like, and the rest of the world really sees things so differently, and so like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, not that I ever want to like mute myself or like dilute myself to match that, but learning how to navigate in like the normie world,
Yeah.
being the way that
Yeah.
we are, is um yeah, it requires a certain level of like tact and just,
Yeah.
you know,
It really is. they don't get it. You can't even say, I mean, the things I'm saying to you, I can't say in a normal conversation because people don't even have a hook to hang the information on, right? There's nothing that it doesn't even resonate at all to them. It's like jibber jabber. Like it doesn't they
It's
don't
like,
get
what are you talking about?
yeah. They have no idea. So it's like we're speaking two different languages. So you do have to navigate the normal world and like you can bring things up, you can ask questions, you can kind of like try to get people thinking about things in a new way. But if I were just to overhaul with everything I know to be true about birth and the broken obstetric system, like there's not even a place for it. They're just like, you're crazy. Like I don't even hear you. These words don't even make sense. So yeah,
Oh,
it's a lot of fun.
absolutely. So so now you're mother of two, and I know that at some point you guys open your home up to
Mhm.
being foster parents. And then of course you go on to have a free birth. So if you want to
Yeah.
just kind of go into those
Yeah.
stories.
Totally. So we after about a year after my son was born, we were ready. We're like, we are so ready to have another child. Felt like God had said you're going to have another child. And we didn't get pregnant for almost 5 years. Um, and so there was grief in there of like really praying, like, God, like you told me this. It felt very different than our 9 years prior. We were just were like, it's okay if we don't have kids. Like we're both have our careers, that's okay. This felt like I really desired children. And in that period, God did lead us to foster care. So we stepped into that for newborns, for babies, 0 to 2. And so we had two children who were placed with us in that no, maybe just one at that point. No, we had two. We had two in there. And then a third right before I became pregnant. Yeah. Anyways, I'm forgetting actually. There's actually probably four. I don't know. Two that ended up staying with us. So there were four total, but two that ended up staying with us. And that I those children I knew that the God had put in our home. And that's like I have a whole if you listen to the Radiant Mission podcast, I tell like the whole story of how God
Oh,
showed me that I was gonna have these children. And then I did. So that's like a whole long thing. I won't go into that because it's very long. But like God revealed to me that these children were going to be my own children, and they were. So that was very beautiful. So I knew that, I trusted that,
um,
and then I still had this like deep longing for another child. And God showed me very clearly that I was going to have another child. And I did finally, eventually. So it's actually funny. Like a week before I found out I was pregnant, we accepted a baby who was 2 days old, and then like that next week, I'm like, oh, I'm pregnant. So I went through that entire pregnancy holding a newborn, which was just
mm,
a very interesting thing. Like it just was kind of
yeah,
crazy. I'm like, I already have a newborn and I have a baby inside me, and like it was
a
very
while.
it was really cool. But I knew with that birth, it was so funny. I'd already been like stepping into birth and, and talking about educating and all the things. And people would say like, are you gonna work with midwives again? And I would jokingly initially just be like, we're probably just gonna have this baby at home by ourselves and like kind of laugh it off. And then as the weeks and the months went by, I was like, no, that's actually what we're going to do. Like I couldn't even bring myself to look up a midwife in the area or a doula in the area. I was like, no, like I know all the midwives now. I know them. Some of them I had they like even talked to me about being an intern with them, and I was like, no, like I would never call any of them. And so it was like a no brainer. Like, of course we're going to stay home and do this ourselves. And I had become aware of the free birth movement, and I knew like this is actually a thing that women are doing. And so I spent that pregnancy learning more about that, listening to the stories, and just like being at peace with my body and my baby. And it was the most beautiful pregnancy. I had all my third trimester. Um, Other than that, it was a very smooth pregnancy, and there was no like, yeah, I was like, it felt so refreshing to not have these appointments where they just ran a bunch of tests I didn't care about. That was always so frustrating to me. Like, yeah, I don't really want to pee in a cup again. Like, I don't really want to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's stupid. So what was interesting is that I had called my mom and said, I want you to be there just to watch my kids. Like you are not my doula. I just want you to watch my kids. And she was like, well, are you going to have a midwife? And I was like, no, it's just gonna be me. And she was like, I don't know what I think about that. And so it's funny, like she's been in birth for so many years. She was a doula since I was like 12 years old. So at
Wow.
like, I don't know, 30 years or something, she's been a doula. And she was like, but like, what about the midwife? So we had to have all these conversations. And she finally came to terms with it. And she free birthed her third baby. I mean, this is like,
Really?
oh yeah, like 40 years ago, she free birthed. Because she just didn't
Oh,
want to go to the hospital. They moved. She didn't like the new OB. So she's like, I'm staying home. I'm like, Mom, you did this. She's like, but yes, but maybe it wasn't wise. And I was like, everything was fine. Like, what wasn't wise about it? Anyways, so that was really funny. Nobody else knew. They when they would ask me, they'd be like, who are you working with? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm working with a local gal. And they were like, left it that. Yeah,
myself.
yeah, myself, I'm local. I'd be like, yeah, having another home birth, working with a local gal. They're like, oh, okay. So nobody had any idea. Um, which is kind of funny because we're like in the parsonage across from the church. And so like people are even like the day he was born, there's like people coming and going. I'm like, people have no idea. Like I'm just right here, like giving birth. Like, you know, it's kind of funny. But his birth, so my mom, she came and we'd had that whole talk. And so like the air was cleared and I was like, okay, it's gonna be good. And again, those like last weeks, though, that last week, I was like, oh, come on, please, Lord, let this baby come. But I had this breakdown one morning, and which a good breakdown for me is like probably my baby's coming. Like I just like it's a very good sign. And for a lot of women, like it's a good indication that you're getting pretty close. So I broke down and I went on a walk and I talked to God and I felt like God was like, yeah, I think it's gonna be like I had this feeling like God was like, it's gonna be today. And we planned to go to the chiropractor to get adjusted. And I had started to have a few sensations that I kind of just felt like just like the low back pressure again, like nothing else, just like some like crampiness. And so I told my husband, and he was like, if we get going and like you go into labor, we'll just turn around. It was like an hour drive there. And I'm thinking like I could have a 45-minute birth, right? Because I had a 2.5 hour, like it could be shorter. And so like everywhere I had been going, I had like a few birth supplies in the car. I'd had several dreams that I'd like given birth on the side of the road. And so I was like ready. Like, all right, wherever the baby comes, like we're gonna do it. And so we like just get on the road and like I start getting some sensations that are like noticeable. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, well, you want to just time them and see? And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do that. Because this it could hit pretty fast. And so they were like at 10 every 10 minutes pretty consistently. And I was like, I think we should go back. Like, I don't think we want to make this whole journey because again, like things could get fast quick with me. That's how I felt. So we turned around. We were going there. We like picked up our raw milk at this other town and like drove home. So we get home and my mom's with the other kids. And so we like get everybody lunch and everybody down for naps. And I still like things had slowed down maybe a little bit, but I was like, I want to get outside and walk. So my husband and I left and we went for a walk. In my mind, I was like, I just want to be outside. It was May. No, it was June. Sorry, it was June. I was like, I want to be outside until like I can't be outside anymore. Like that was my feeling. Like I could be inside a long time. Because at this point, I'm like, okay, this isn't happening that fast. So like, what if it's like gonna be 24 hours? So like I want to stay outside as long as I can. And so we walked around town. We live in a little town. We walked around town for forever. I'm sure people saw us do like multiple loops and stopping and like breathing through sensations and keeping on walking. But it was such a beautiful walk. It was so fun. And then it got to a point where I was like, okay, like I feel a little vocal. Like let's go back home. Let's get inside. And so we get home and I had rented this dress that I knew I wanted to labor in. Everybody's probably seen it. Like I have like earrings and dress on because I was like, I want to dress because I'm not going to pull my shorts off. And like, I'm not a naked laborer. I'm not, I love actually feeling like beautiful and like having things on me. And so, so I like put on my birth outfit and I knew I wanted to be in my bathroom and that felt like the most normal place to be. It was like away from everybody else in the house. And so I'd already kind of planned that. I'd put all my other birth pictures in the room and that's how I had visualized it. And so then I labored in there. Again, I love standing. Like I'm kind of an active laborer until I can't be active anymore. So standing and swaying and listening to my birth playlist. And then my legs were getting really tired. And so I told my husband, like, bring in the birthing ball. So he brought it in so I could sit on in between sensations. And I like one round of that and like stood up and my water just burst, like the big dramatic, like koosh. And my 2-year-old was in the room at that point and it like scared him. So he's like screams like, ah, like, what just came out of mom? And so I'm like, no, no, like it's you're okay, it's safe, it's fine. So I don't know if he'll ever, he loves, yeah, excited about birth. Like he was a little shocked. He was not expecting a big burst of water to come out of me. And I like screamed at the same time because it hit pretty hard. But at that point, it just like labor, it was hitting hard. And so this all kind of started, I want to say like 10:30-ish. The whole labor was like 6 hours. I think he was born around 4:30, somewhere in that range. So this is probably getting to be like an hour from when he emerges, maybe an hour and a half. And so I think shortly after that period, I was like down on hands and knees again. And it was very great to be in the bathroom. I was like puking. I could puke in the toilet and then I could still be right there, like going through another sensation. And my mom came in. So she's supposed to be watching kids, but she couldn't handle herself. So she like peeks her head around the door and she was like, keep your voice low, Audrey, keep your voice low. Like the doula in her, like she can't stop. And I remember like I mustered everything I had to like, because it's hard to talk. It's really hard to talk in labor.
Yeah.
And I was like, shut up, mom. And like she still like sent it another round of contractions. And I was like, get out of here. And she, I mean, she was right. Like I know all these things too. I'm like, yes, like
Yeah.
I should keep my voice low. But that's the thing, like when you have somebody you feel safe with, it's fine. Like that didn't mess up anything birth wise because I can yell at my mom, like, get out of here.
Yeah.
Having somebody who's a stranger that you're not comfortable with, that's a very different scenario because then you're like trying to do the right thing for them.
Did I
Um,
hurt their feelings? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like I wasn't worried about that at all. Like, get out of here. I already told you, you're not supposed to be here. Um, so, and I didn't care that she was watching or anything, but like I already told her, like, your role is not to be a doula, like your role is to be the babysitter. Um, and my kids were just like here and there, like they had like a show going and they had like one phone and an iPad, and I swear they're probably watching 3 different shows at once. And they were just like coming in the bathroom, see how mom's doing, run back out, eating snacks. They talk about it later, like, mom, you let us watch anything we wanted, like anything we wanted to do, anything we wanted to eat, everybody just let us do it. It was like a free. They're like, it was
Right?
amazing. Yeah.
When mom's in labor, you can get
Yeah.
away with whatever you want.
Exactly. So yeah, there's 4 of them at that point. So they're like, yeah, they're just like doing all the things. And like, yep, like that's how it had to happen. Um, but I remember feeling I got to the point where I was, you feel like I'm like, I can't keep doing this. And I knew I was starting to shriek and feel kind of panicky. And I just prayed, like, God, just help me. I don't want to scream this baby out. I want to breathe this baby out. I don't want to be like feeling spastic and out of control. I really want this to be calm, and praying very intentionally to God, like, help me rein this in, really. And I did, like, literally the next couple sensations, I didn't scream, I breathed. In fact, my husband and my mom both were like, oh, we thought labor stopped. Like, we just were like, oh, I think everything
Wow.
stopped. And that after probably 3 more contractions, I could feel him. And it's really interesting. My mom, she was behind me watching, and she said, it was really crazy, Audrey, because often you can see a woman's body opening before the baby is emerging. And she was like, I would have never known a baby was going to emerge. Like your body was totally closed until the moment he came. And that's what I felt too. I at one point like tried to reach and see if I could feel anything, and I could feel nothing. And it's like he sat up high until the moment he emerged, which that happens. And it's not, again,
Yeah.
it's like one of those variations that women don't know about. So they're like, no, nothing's engaged yet, honey. You're not ready. And the woman's like having her baby in the parking lot, right? Because they're like,
Yeah.
no, you need to be here. You're fine. That
That
was
was literally what happened to me too.
yeah.
They were like, she can't fit through the canal.
Seriously.
And then boom, yeah. They were
Yep.
gonna give me a C-section. I'm like, what?
That's
Yeah. It
crazy.
came 2 seconds later
No way. This is the
while they
mystery.
were getting the C-section papers.
Oh my goodness. You're like, take
Yeah.
that. Prove you wrong. It's not an uncommon thing, but we have this like very textbook view of birth where like this has to happen and then this has to happen and this has to happen. And it
Yeah, what
doesn't.
station are they in? And like, yeah.
Yeah. It was so beautiful to not know any of that. Like I knew nothing, right? Like it's just like I'm just out here doing what feels right. And that's the the best place to be for any mother in labor, just out there doing what's right by yourself. And
Yeah.
so I could feel him like drop, like, and fall into the birth canal. Like, all right, he's there. And I didn't push. I breathed and his head came out. And then, so then I had like, and I was kind of supporting his head as it came on his knees. And then I just kind of like was pausing and I kept thinking like, well, I'm waiting to feel him rotate. And I kept not feeling him rotate. And I'm like, okay, like, do I try pushing again? So I remember like trying to push and there was like nothing I could even push. It felt like my entire pelvic floor was just nothing. There's nothing there. And so I just waited, and literally the next contraction, he just fetal ejection reflex. He just came flying out, and I scooped him
Wow.
up, and he immediately grabbed my shirt. Like he was that like vibrant and active. He like grabbed it, and I remember like prying his little hands off to be like, okay, like let me make sure like you're breathing. Of course he's breathing. He's already grabbed my shirt, but like I was like making sure he's okay.
Oh.
Um, and just that, oh, it was the most healing thing to have no interference, nobody to steal the show. Like there's a video on my Instagram. My daughter is just like, she's just like showering accolades down, like, "Mommy, you're so amazing. You're so
I
powerful." And
know.
like, I didn't even hear that. I was so immersed. And I didn't experience that with my first two. Like, I didn't know that she said those things until I watched the videos back. She was my little
Oh,
photographer. That was her job because I wasn't going to have anybody else there. And so like she's taking the video while she's saying these things. And I had no idea. I had no idea. I just was like lost in him. And that, oh, even as I talk about it now, I can just like, oh, it was so healing. It was like I didn't even know it
oh.
could be this way. Um, and then I started having really bad after pains like right away. Like it was like I was still having contractions, and I was like, hold up now, this is not fair. So I remember like trying, or like before I even left the bathroom, I was like, well, let me see if I can get the placenta out. It was not ready, but I thought, oh, like these have got to stop. And so probably like 45 minutes later, I was like, okay, we're gonna try again. I'd moved to the bed at that point and like squatted, and the placenta came right out. Not a problem. Just like one little push. And that minimized them a little. Like they lessened, but still, it just that's often the way it is when you have.
Yeah.
So heat felt really good. I had known I wanted to put a piece of placenta in my mouth. I had learned about how that's preventative of hemorrhage. I wasn't hemorrhaging, but I just was like, I want to do this. So I did. And that was a really cool experience. Like, I think any woman should do that if she wants to. Um, my mom just cut off a piece, like once I birthed the placenta, she just cut off of like a little like quarter size piece. And I was like, can you rinse it off? Like, I just didn't want like blood in my mouth. And she did. And I put it under my tongue. And I don't know if I mean, like, there's no way to know. There wasn't a problem, but I did. And that's what I wanted to do. So that was fun. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that was my plan. Um, I'd also tried to use, I was like, not going to do anything synthetic. So I had all of these like, pads that were, yeah, they were like fabric, and they were not absorbing the blood. So the blood did look like a lot. And at one point, my mom was like, that's a lot of blood. I remember feeling a little bit like, oh my goodness, maybe it's a lot. We called a friend and like asked her to go get chuck pads because we're like this. And I only had cloth pads too, to like even put on postpartum. And it was just like nothing was absorbing. And we were feeling like, this just feels like a lot of blood. And I was like, I just need some good old like chuck pads and diapers.
Yeah.
Like there's a time and a place, and like I'm
You
being with
felt perfectly fine. It was just
I felt
the
totally fine.
visual of
The
actually
visual,
seeing all.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then like I'm like taking these pads and like, they're like you have to rinse them out and everything. And I just was like, it was like so much blood. I was like, I can't do this. So then like it's probably, I don't know, 30 minutes later, she shows up with all those things and I'm like, thank you. And it is amazing how like a chuck pad or like a Depends, like they will absorb it in a way that you're just not seeing it. So for anybody out there who like the visual, because the visual can mess with your mind. Like, so
Oh,
you're targeting
totally.
things that don't cause like that minimize any fear. Um, that made a difference. It just did. It was like, oh, now I'm not seeing it all because it just kind of was like pooling, and I
Yeah.
was like, "There's a lot of blood." Yeah, but I was feeling fine. Um, I drank a smoothie that had some placenta in it. I think I had like I wanted like fried eggs. That's all I really wanted the whole last trimester. And I still was like, that's all I want. Like that's all I feel like. Like fried eggs and toast. And just being so snuggled up in my bed with my baby. My kids, it was like dinner time. So mom was like, I'm gonna go make the kids dinner. And I was like, great, go make the kids dinner. And just
Oh,
sitting in
I
my
love that.
bedroom in my bed and holding my baby and looking at him and just being like, this was so simple. Like it was just so simple. Like
Yeah.
that was perfectly simple. And then that that night, so at that point everybody was still sleeping in our room and we had like mats we lay out. And so it was like everything was the same. Only now the baby was like on my chest instead of inside of me. And everybody just like laid down and went to sleep. I was like, what?
Oh,
Like it's just so simple. I didn't
yeah.
tear. There was no tearing. In fact, I looked the next day because I was like, okay, I'm curious. Like, what happened? Is I already knew I didn't tear. There was no burning when I peed or anything, but it didn't even look like it had a baby. To the point that I was like, babe, like you have to come see this. Like, it looks like I didn't have a baby. Like, how is everything so intact? Like, I'm used to looking a little bit stretched out after have a baby. So I think the fact that he was so high and up high the whole time, and then he just like came through.
It wasn't
That was
so
really
swollen
crazy
and
to me. I just was like,
everything.
I would yes. There was no swelling or
Yeah.
pressure. Yeah, that was really
Yeah.
interesting to me. Um, my wonderful friend, she's a chiropractor. She came the next day with her table and came over and like adjusted us and just spent time with us. And that was just the most beautiful, like perfect nurturing postpartum thing to do. Like
Yeah.
I felt totally comfortable with her and my tailbone had been really hurting me. So that was like that was beautiful. That's exactly what I wanted. Um yeah. And I was like, I'm home. I'm with my baby. I'm not getting up. I'm all those things I was far more intentional about. And still even with this pregnancy, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be even more intentional. Like it's like you realize like you'll never regret like, oh well, I wish I'd gotten up sooner. You will never regret that.
Oh, yeah, no. No.
Never.
So,
Like you can't ever
how
overdo your
wait,
postpartum because it's the most precious time. You'll never get back. Yeah. Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
I lost you for a second.
Oh my God.
Um, how did your how was your family after this experience? Like, because of course you had your children there, your husband, your mom. Was your dad there too for this
No,
one, or was
he
it just
wasn't
your
there.
mom?
No, no.
And I know you had mentioned your mom had some, concerns
Yeah.
initially, but after seeing it all happen and go so
Yeah.
beautifully, how did that change everything?
I mean, she was like, yeah, like you can do it. Like there's not it all shifted. All of that was gone. Where she was like, yeah,
Yeah.
this happened beautifully. Um, and even now, like talking about my next birth, and she'll be there for that. It's like it's not even an issue. Like, yeah, of course you're gonna do that. Um, it's just like the weird little fear hangups that we get caught on that she's now realized like they aren't actually things. Like we don't need to worry
Yeah.
about these things. And so that's even I think probably expanded her view of birth a lot.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this can happen when we don't disturb it. And like maybe the disturbance is causing these things. I think it's made her contemplate some of that. And then like for my kids, it's so beautiful because they did like all the educating through that pregnancy with me, right? Like we talked about birth all the time. We watched all the birth videos. And so they were so ready for it. And now they know more about birth than a lot of pregnant expecting women and women who've had babies. Like they can tell you what's up.
I'm sure.
Like they know birth.
That's
And
beautiful.
so they're shocked that people even go to the hospital. They're like, "What?" We're like, "Why?" It's so funny to
I
me.
love that.
You like connect it with like your relationship with God because I talk about like you're trusting God with your baby. This is what we're doing. And
Yeah.
so like my son, he's like such a literal kid. He'll be like, "Mom, they went to the hospital for their baby." And he's like, "Do they like they're like somebody he knows from church?"
Do
He's
they
like,
trust God?
they love God?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they love God." He's like, "Yeah. Do they trust God?" And I'm like, "Well, kind of, yes, but maybe not in the area of birth." And he's like, "Are they gonna go to heaven?" And
Oh,
I'm
I
like
love that.
I'm like, yeah, I think that they have a personal relationship with Jesus, and they don't understand that this part of like the all of your life is to be given to God. They don't get that.
Yeah.
But he'll like ask those things. Like later, he'll be like, "Wait, did she say she had her baby in the hospital? Does she does she love God?"
Oh my goodness. I love this
Like he's out
though.
here thinking like everybody who shows up at the hospital is just straight pagan. And I'm like, but
Right?
but like actually, when we actually break it down, like let's think about it. Like what parts of our
Totally.
lives are we giving to God? And what parts in the Old Testament it talks about over and over God says, "Woe to you who go down to Egypt." Because the Israelites, they've like pulled out of Egypt. They are now in the promised land, and they keep going back to Egypt because Egypt had military and Egypt had medicine. And so those were the things they'd go back to Egypt for, because that's actually where medicine started, was in Egypt. And so God's like, "Woe to you, like cry out to me." And so
Wow.
as believers, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
like, woe to you who go down to Egypt. Like, are we actually placing it in God's hands and trusting his design and trusting him with the outcomes? Or are we going to Egypt? Yeah. Anyways, that's a whole nother I
Absolutely.
could go off. But it does matter. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it totally does. I mean, I I think really like people need to focus more on having building their faith, in pregnancy so that they feel more better prepared for birth, instead of going to, outsource through whatever it is, getting the midwife or the OB or whoever to just, you know, put on a pedestal and basically to be our heroes, quote
Yeah.
unquote. But
Mhm.
yeah, so much to unpack in that.
Anyway,
But
it's a whole
but
other topic.
wow, so I have to just ask though, so how was this postpartum?
Oh, so much better. I remember thinking like, I have never been a more embodied, powerful woman in my entire life.
Wow.
Like I so I eating disorder when I was it started when I was 18, and it lasted a good 10 years. And I remember telling my husband like I lost myself then. I really did. There was so much of myself that I lost. Like wow, like I feel and before that I had felt very embodied. But it's like I had broken and I had fractured and I had recovered, but I had never had like embodied myself again. And I was like, if this is what I would have felt like had I never dealt with an eating disorder that destroyed me and fractured me. And like I'm like 10 times more than that. Like I just came out feeling like I couldn't even put it into words.
Like
Like I
leveled
am
up. Yeah.
unstoppable. I am confident. I have zero anxiety. Like I was like, what is this? Like I didn't I already considered myself a force of nature a little bit. Like I kind of have, I can have a forceful something about me. And I was like, what? This is amazing. Just taking that ownership and it's the whole experience. You can't even put it into words, but it did. It changed everything. And I, I have, there's things about that postpartum that I'm still like, oh, like my husband didn't have paternity leave. And I'm like, I wish he had this one. He will. And so like little things like that. But like, no, I didn't go out until I was ready. I took all the time that I wanted to. I sat and nursed my baby all day long with like no guilt. For as long as I wanted to. Like I really did care for myself in the way that I needed to. And still, like I said before, I'm like, I want it to be longer. Like it still wasn't long enough. Like I need it to be longer because it's so precious. And there's
Yeah.
no rush to get back to life. Life will always be there,
Yeah.
but it won't. It will fade so quickly. So yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the sooner you try to like integrate back into like regular life, that just slowly starts to fade. And then once it's gone, it's like that's it. It's gone. And yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's so
Yeah.
important to just really cherish all of that for as long as possible.
Yeah.
Um and yeah, I mean it's totally a theme in Freebirth that I've listened to countless women share their stories, and it's truly a night and day experience postpartum when you choose to, do it yourself and completely, claim that entire experience. It's like words couldn't put it in, couldn't describe it. Um, and so, yeah, I was really excited to hear how your postpartum journey was after that, because that is a life-shifting experience.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited for you to do it again.
No, so am I. I'm like, oh my goodness. It's gonna be even, I mean, I don't know if it's gonna be better. It's just gonna be amazing again. It's gonna be amazing again. Yeah. And
Yeah, because well, this time you've done it before, and so you kind of, like you're a pro. You're like you're a birth pro at this point. In more than just the ways of experiencing it, but
I
the
also
way
know
that you
better.
support women, and you just know all of the nuances now, and I feel like having that kind of confidence going into anything just makes such a difference.
Totally.
Um but yeah, I'm so excited for you.
You
Um,
too.
Thank you for sharing these beautiful stories. I can't wait to hear the next one.
I know, me too. I'm like, it's so crazy because as much as you know every birth is gonna be different, then you start to like be like, okay, but I wonder if it's gonna be like that, or I wonder if it's gonna be like that, or like, because you feel you could feel your previous births like in your body and like, like I don't know. Anyways, it's gonna be really exciting to see
Yeah.
how it plays out. And it's really funny in birth work, everybody will be like, well, your first birth is your longest, and your second is your shortest, and your third is your wild card. But it's like people don't typically have more than three babies in our society. So nobody's telling you like what the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and the seventh are like, right? So like we
Yeah.
have no data. It's just like they're rogue. You're just
Yeah.
rogue. Just
And I
doing
don't even buy all of those, like,
no, no,
either,
no.
because I've heard so many stories where it doesn't match that, and and I
That's what
just,
they tell you, right? Like that's what they'll say. Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like, those things, it's just, again, it becomes a mind game, because then if you go into it with the expectation that, like, oh, well, this is, my third baby, so this is going to be short, or they're going to come earlier because, that's the pattern,
Yeah.
right? And I know I totally psyched myself out with that nonsense with my daughter's birth. I was like sure
So
that she wasn't going
true.
to go past her due date, guest date, whatever. I was like, nope, she's coming by 38 weeks.
Oh
It's
my
going to be under 12 hours, like all the expectations. And none of that happened.
yeah. Right. You just have to let it all go. Just like
Yeah.
you have to let it go. Oh, it's so true. It's
Yeah.
so true.
It's
And
just
even
the
you
constant
hear birth
surrendering.
stories. Yeah, that you'll be like, you can like latch on to a birth story or two and be like, oh, it'll be like
Yeah.
that. Like I feel like pregnancy is like this season. You want to glean everything you can. Like, you really do. Like you love the stories. You're loving like gathering information. But it's like you have to glean it all and then like let it all go and be
Oh,
open
yeah.
to whatever is here for you because it might not be any of those things and you
Yeah.
just get to be, and so it's like so beautifully unknown and a wild pregnancy, like where I'm like, oh my goodness, like I'm bigger than I've ever been, so like what is happening, like is it one baby, is it two babies? I have a son who's like praying for triplets and I'm like like you just have all these things that just like I don't know, like I'm just
Yeah.
here for this journey. I'm sure you're feeling that even.
No, the wild pregnancy thing is really another layer of like,
Yeah.
whoa, because it's one thing when I feel like you just kind of do it for the birth, but when it's from the beginning to end,
Yeah.
and that's so opposite of what people out here in the world are doing. I mean, even just having a regular conversation with someone at the grocery store, it's like, "Oh, well, what are you having?" Or,
I
"Oh,
know.
like, you know, how when's the due date?" And it's like, I don't even feel comfortable answering those questions.
Same here.
And how do you tell them, "Oh, I don't know. I'm not getting sonograms," or like, "I don't even have a doctor," or,
Right.
that's
You're
like,
like,
"Wait, what?"
I'm
It's
just
like
here.
calling, like, child services on you. Like people just don't
They don't.
know how to like hear these things.
They
It's
don't.
so, yeah, it's so radical and different and but beautiful and so much mystery. And really like coming from, you know, like as a believer, it's just the ultimate like opportunity to have like just full faith in God and his plan. And
Mhm.
yeah, and it's not easy. There's lots of surrendering and lots of, you know, just having to work through it all, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it.
I agree. It's totally worth it. Like anything else after this would feel so like, oh, like canned, right? Like I'd have the most beautiful steak in the world and now I'm eating like nasty, like, like canned beef stew. You know what I mean? Like it's just
Right?
no, like I already know how good it is. Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Audrey. Well, can you share with the listeners how they can find you and what it is that you are offering to the world right now as a birth worker, as a birth keeper?
Right. So you can find me at A Joyful Birth on Instagram or ajoyfulbirth.org is my website. Although I have far more information on my Instagram, actually. I do lots of one-on-one coaching for women who are planning to free birth, or they maybe even are working with a midwife, but want to do some coaching along, I mean, any birth topic. I also have monthly calls that I do for anybody who wants to jump on those. I do birth trauma debriefs as well for women who have experienced traumatic births they want to break down and really talk through. And then I also have a mental fortitude for birth course, which I think the mental aspect of birth is like one of the most important things and often forgotten. And then I also do in person birth support. So I work with women in my local area as well, although I will be taking a break for my own postpartum period. But yeah, you can find me in all those places and I'm available. And I also have done I can't talk virtual support. So there are women it's kind of a new thing that women like realize there's this option for also virtual support if they're free birthing, but want to have an outside perspective. So I do that as well.
I love that. The monthly calls are just, it's like unbelievable the value that comes from this. Like I highly recommend to any woman who's considering having a baby or is having a baby because there's just so much that you can get from it and it's like insane how affordable Audrey has made the monthly calls. So yeah,
I do
highly
think
recommend.
if a woman started like her pregnancy journey and just was jumping even on the monthly calls, they would get like an entire prenatal's worth of information and free birth
Yeah.
education just from those. Because I just pack it full with anything and everything I know. I'm totally open book to pass on to those women. Yeah, yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Audrey. You are just
It's beautiful to talk with
such a
you.
blessing. Love talking to you.
Likewise.
Really.
Yeah.
No. Enjoy the rest of your night. I'll
You
talk to you
too.
soon.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.